Every single leader I've spoken to or person in cyber I've spoken to is worried and concerned about mythos and fable. Toyota or Nissan or Volvo, whoever it is, would not release a car without a seatbelt or safety features. So I see it in the same way that mythos and fable, should not be released. Essentially, there needs to be more regulation around software and solutions.
Hello everybody, you are listening to Agents After Dark, powered by Prefactor. I am Matthew Doughty, CEO and co-founder of Prefactor.ai. As enterprises deploy more AI agents, one question becomes increasingly difficult to answer. How do you actually know what your agents are doing? Prefactor gives organizations a place to see how their agents are behaving, where they're performing as intended, where risk is emerging, and what action needs to be taken. I'm delighted to be joined today by Sara Abak, who has been acknowledged as a top 100 cybersecurity leader by the Cyber Express. She regularly appears on stage in Australia at a number of different conferences as an extremely experienced CISO operating across energy and utilities. Thank you so much for being with me today, Sara. And I guess just as a first question, when we've spoken before, you have, I would say, kind of a unique approach to kind of coming into organizations that have had kind of slightly complicated relationships with security, and being able to kind of turn around that approach and being able to bring people along the journey. How do you go into an organization and change the culture around security and cybersecurity when entering an organization for the first time?
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's actually, I've gone through this process a couple of times, and it's different for each organization, but I think the pattern and the strategy that you use is very similar. It's really anchored in understanding what's important for that business or businesses, and I think that's probably one differentiator I recommend, for even technology leaders, to be able to understand what the organization is actually about. What are the objectives or purpose of each business unit? What are they trying to achieve? Doing a little bit of a threat surface sort of assessment to see, how many people are there? How many endpoints? What are the technologies they have? What are their sort of key suppliers? What are their key customers? How much data are they holding, and what kind of data? And giving them a bit of a view on what may be important. Also having a look at their geolocations. Those sort of data points are really important, and they're probably the most important things that I anchor myself in to be able to develop a bit of a view of what may be important, what the threats may be, what are the channels of attack for that organization, and then build around using good practice cybersecurity capabilities or framework to be able to map and see which ones of those are applicable for the organisation, but obviously also having a bit of a view on what the current security posture is, and not too detailed, but usually you'll get an external supplier to come and do that for you, but if it's already done before, it's just synthesizing that and having a bit of a map of what are those key things, frameworks that we're going to work towards. How do we demonstrate what those key cybersecurity core capabilities are, and which ones are going to be applicable for us, and how will they be consumed by, whether it's an enterprise level, whether it's by certain business units. That sort of mapping and understanding where the requests and advice you need to provide, or where you need to lead things, it really helps. That's what helps, I think. Without that, I think you're just going to apply a generic theoretical approach, and that doesn't tend to work. Because you can't connect with the leaders of each business unit. You can't help them, you can't enable them, you can't protect what you don't know, you can't protect what you can't see. So the best thing to do is really understand all of those things, and really understand what cybersecurity services or capabilities we need to provide, and then develop those, design those, or uplift them or augment them. And I'm not saying have it all internally. Again, it depends on the operating model. It may be a hybrid approach. It depends on the size, depends on the risks, depends on the budget. All of those things depends where the organisation is currently sitting in terms of growth. So you really need to map out, where you are right now. What are sort of the short-term things that impact that you can make, and then the long-term impacts. But I think the most important thing is just demonstrating that you're going to make it easier for people to digest and to do business with you. If you're an internal person, internal leader and team, providing services and helping protect or detect cyber threats, it's not about the cyber part, it's about why you're there and how can you help the organisation and the people and the business units. And it takes time to create that change and that culture change. It takes time through what you do, and you can demonstrate that positive impact through how you approach it, how your team interacts and communicates with people at various levels. And then also, I think what impacts it as well depends what kind of a business you are. If you're private equity, or if you're a Victorian government organisation, or whether you're a startup. So depending on what the value is, and you have to sort of adjust what you want to achieve and how best you can make a positive impact.
Well, and I think when we last spoke, you kind of talked about the role of the CISO as a platform, an enabling function for the business.
That's right, yeah.
I think when most people picture a CISO or the people in cybersecurity, I think there's a bit of a reputation that it's the people that say no.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that gap comes from? And I guess leading on to the next part of the question will be like, well, how do you shifted that kind of mentality from people that you worked with in the business that you have?
Yeah, the short answer is through unsuccessful attempts over the last 10 whatever years, and trying to create change and lead change and seeing how long it takes and the impact it's having on people and culture. But I think you're right, the way I adapted my style and how I guess matured my thinking and how I could enable people. I think I use the term sort of like an analogy, saying my role is to create a platform for people to take off and do what they need to do safely. So the way I've been approaching that really is just making sure, again, I anchor my the services and what I'm providing to actually help them. At the same time, being firm around and professional around how you have those difficult conversations, just being open about what the risks are and what the exposure may be, and that you're not quite comfortable with how they're approaching things, and providing those data and facts really help, and then having that conversation. I think what's influenced that in the past, how people, CISOs behave in an audit risk committee or a board level or ELT level. I think traditionally, there's this expectation that we are governing things and we're independent, and that we need to, I guess, lay down the law and be firm. And not that we were told to be against people, but I think there's that opinion, and I have had this conversation with people who, let's say CISOs, who have been clashing, at the board level or AGL level. And I remember saying to one really experienced CISO, but don't you want to build trust when you go to the board and when you go to the audit and risk committee? Don't you want to build trust for them to accept what you're saying and to go along with what you're saying? You need to build that trust. And the reason why they're probably asking you, why haven't you done this, or I want you to do this, is probably because they want some concessions, or maybe our style's not adapting to what they're expecting. Trying to simplify that and making it organisation specific when you do go to a board or when you go to the audit and risk committee, and showing why it matters and it resonates with the board or ELT and whatever, whoever the stakeholders are. That's what's important. I think it's a one size fits all has been sort of applied in some cases. So that's breaking away. But yeah, we need to really build that trust.
So at the beginning of your career, you trained in clinical psychology, and I think
I didn't train in it. I've got a university degree in it.
Degree in it. And I guess what's interesting about the way you just described the approach that you take, it's almost like a management philosophy of building trust to enable people to go on the journey that you're going on. To what extent do you kind of leverage that kind of initial that degree, that experience of kind of psychology as part of your day-to-day, and how important is that today in kind of a world where there is a significant amount of change, there's a significant amount of risk, and it's constantly changing with at ever greater speed? Like, how do you kind of meld the two parts of kind of your experiences together?
Yeah, I think it's really important, given that behaviour and behaviour, values and attitude is so important when you go into an organisation. And I think it's just doing that analysis up front, doing spending the time to understand people's personalities and what's driving them, why they're saying this, why they have a pattern of behaviour or why things are the way they are. I think it helps bring meaning to some of it. I mean, you can't get lost in it because, it could be a never-ending cycle. I think it's just a bit of a view into how to be able to get the best out of the situation. So I think that's what has helped me, because I understand the psychology and behavioural aspects of why people or leaders may be doing certain things in the way they are. When you do go into it by understanding and empathising and not being defensive and open and not fearful, you can probably get more out of the partnership, even if you disagree with certain stakeholders or leaders or the way organisations are moving. You may also figure out that, guess what, this is a dead cause. You're actually not going to get much out of it. So try to cut your losses and maybe approach it in a different way, because you might not be able to get the change that you want. And so that's also accepting what you can't change, so then you don't waste your time and energy and somebody else's time and energy. Earlier in my career, I remember thinking, I'll just prepare this great business case, whatever it was, to get, walk through a leader what I'm thinking and introduce something, and usually, it wouldn't be great. What I learned, obviously, over the last sort of 10, 15 years is sometimes you're not going to get the answer that you want the first time. So you always have to go into the conversation with working out, where you can create change and what are the different phases and things that you have to do, maneuver around to be able to do the engagement, do the work, try your best, put your best foot forward, communicate, and then, seek approval or support. So I think it's, again, going back to that human factor, because you've got to work through people, not bots at the moment. It's not like we're trying to convince bots, because the bot, when you tell the bot something, they'll just go and do it if the program allows it, but with humans, you can't just say, do this, or give me this, or approve this, and it's not going to happen. So it's a little bit different, but that approach, I think, helps. And again, going back to understanding how people make decisions, how they operate, what's their personality, taking that information, reading the room, and don't just go into every conversation or meeting thinking that it's, whatever approach you're taking is going to be acceptable. It's got to be adaptable, and it's not what you talk about in the meetings and in the board meetings or audit risk committee meetings. It's what you talk about and what you do outside those forums, what you talk about in the hallway, what you talk about before you get there, and who you talk to before you get there is going to make a big difference.
Sure. So you gave me a nice bridge to the next question I've got, which is, you can't control bots, and a lot of what you've talked about has been kind of the human element of managing kind of cybersecurity, managing change within organizations. The pace of change, and I guess, for anyone listening to this, about 2 weeks ago, Fable was pulled from Anthropic's library. I suspect it will get re-released soon. And, the news this week or last week was that the NSA had said that it had broken all of their something to do with their
all of their controls,
all of their controls,
basically,
exactly. And so, I mean, like, when stuff is moving at that pace, how do you adapt as a leader in cyber to that pace? And obviously, what you've talked about is all about kind of how you take people on that journey. But when things are moving so fast, not only the question I've got, like, how do you keep up with kind of the latest things that you need to worry about as a cybersecurity leader, but then how do you help others go on that journey when people's awareness of the damage you can do with an agent today is minimal relative to the impact that they can have?
Yeah, I think it's two parts. The first thing is obviously the way I keep up to date. I'm part of a large community of cyber community, which really helps. And also I'm regularly, engaged and attending sort of key events, even though they're not that long, just to connect and talk to other leaders and really anchor myself in what's happening, how are they dealing with things, and just sharing knowledge and I guess challenges. And there's a saying, I think, is a problem shared is a problem solved. Is that right? Something like that. So I sort of take that approach. On top of that, I think I have three sort of views around the fable and the mythos. I guess the more humane version or the more compliant version, fable. But the first thing is, I think definitely, unfortunately, we don't have any regulation or laws, and that's why this chaos is occurring, in my opinion. That's why you're seeing all these organisations, every single leader I've spoken to or person in cyber I've spoken to is worried and concerned about mythos and fable. And this is a problem, right? I was using an analogy in another forum. I said, Toyota or Nissan or Volvo, whoever it is, would not release a car without a seatbelt or safety features, and providing assurance. So I see it in the same way that, mythos and fable, should not be released because it's dangerous. It may be criminal, it may not be, but essentially, there needs to be more regulation around software and solutions. If they can be so damaging and so chaotic and impactful to the whole world, I mean, hello, that's one thing. So and that's what's happened, right? So I'm not saying block all innovation. I'm saying we need to approach it very pragmatically. Again, that if something is unsafe and is going to cause chaos, then it needs to be paused and blocked for release until it's safe.
How do you define safe though? Like, because you mentioned that you don't want to prevent innovation, but ultimately increasing regulation. Someone might say, by massively increasing regulation and preventing the release of things like Fable, you're ultimately threatening innovation. How do you kind of pair those two things together?
Well, I think I would just apply the same principles and same laws and I guess attitude to it with products, any products, like I said, like a car or a school or something, whatever the definition is of harm and crime and things like that. Same with guns, for example. Not that this is about guns, but you wouldn't allow people to get a license for guns if certain criteria wasn't met. So I would say we need to approach it in that way, to make sure that if, again, a risk-based lens, that if it's going to cause risk and create more risk or introduce more risk and expose, globally so many people and things, obviously that's dangerous. But on a side note, I guess that aside, that's still evolving. So perhaps that it may not be released because there's not enough regulation or assurance across that it won't get into the wrong hands and be misused for evil or for adversaries to use and impact so many people. The other things, I think the two other things I recommend, and this is what we adapt our, response to emerging threats or emerging issues, is really to have a look at, again, go look at your foundations. Make sure your foundational security controls are appropriate and layered, having a layered sort of lens to be able to make it harder for the adversary to compromise or damage or impact your critical systems or data, whatever it may be, whatever's important for the organisation, whether it's your operational technology environment, whether it's your email system, whether it's your CRM, whatever it may be. Our role is just to make sure we're not an easy target, and so just going through and making sure that your foundations, cybersecurity controls or IT controls, and your business rules are strong will probably give you a better chance to defend yourself or catch it while it's trying to progress, and that zero trust type approach, not technology, but zero trust in terms of making sure that at each point, if there's something important, you just layer on more controls to make it harder for something to be compromised or where you can detect it more earlier. The other thing I think is really important and probably will resonate with a lot of other CISOs and IT leaders is also to make sure that we keep our security partnerships or technology partners accountable and ask them to help and drive and protect us or provide explanations around what are they doing to help us, because we've all purchased and licensed for so much security software and solutions and managed services, and so it's a shared responsibility, it's a team sport. So we can't just do this on our own, and so we have those partnerships, so we need to reach out and have those conversations and really push our partners, suppliers, security partners, to help us to solve some of these problems, provide assurance and uplift whatever they're doing to be able to protect our environment or our assets, whether it's digital or whether it's physical things. I think that's sort of a little bit of a combination of things that we need to have a think about and work through. But that's how I'm sort of approaching it with those three things, regulations, foundations, putting in more controls, and then making sure your suppliers are also supporting you through this process to make it harder.
So I'm interested in the vendor accountability piece because, in the same way as your people inside your organization would be using kind of variety of agentic solutions or building agents, your vendors are as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a plethora. I mean, I was at RSAC a couple of months back, and the whole floor in San Francisco was just new AI security tools.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that, not only your stack is up to date, but that, you do hold those security companies accountable? Because as you say, like a Fable, for example, can do damage to your organization, but it can just as much do damage to the vendors and the suppliers that you've got. So how do you hold them accountable?
Yeah, that's really relevant because it's been popping up the last couple of months, obviously. And I think the key is, unfortunately, we want to leverage the AI capabilities that they have, but essentially we wouldn't switch them on or enable them until we go through some sort of review assessment process to be able to determine what it's actually doing, what the impact may be, a little bit of hygiene, so I can give examples. We've got ERP systems that, providers that obviously have AI. So you shouldn't enable anything until you do an audit or get some assurance around what the impact is, how it's going to impact your organization. Once you're comfortable with it, then I think it's okay. Whether it's targeted smaller areas rather than big, it just depends. Same with, for example, diligent board papers. I know that a lot of organizations haven't enabled that yet. They also provide AI, and I know a lot of organizations and boards use diligent board paper platform, SaaS platform. It's the same. You don't enable it until you do go through that sort of due diligence and risk assessment or security assessment. Another thing is, engaging with them and asking them, depending on what solutions you're using, what AI, for example, capability they are introducing or have. So again, this is, when you have your monthly meeting, governance meetings, or your account manager, customer success manager, whoever it is that owns the relationship, to have those conversations, and then get your security teams involved as well to make sure that you're going through appropriate risk assessment to make a decision. One of the actually managed services that we have is actually introducing sort of more AI to help, more detection. It's not introducing AI, but it's introducing the ability to detect, AI threats and risks, which is great. So things like that is good to see, right? That the suppliers or our partners are actually also helping and already onto, a new version that is going to help us be able to defend ourselves against AI type threats. So it's not an actual AI, but yeah. So they're the things that I think would be important, because they're the questions we need to ask when we're doing the due diligence and assessment, risk assessment, and then making decisions.
That makes a lot of sense, kind of as a framework. I guess I think about kind of using the likes of ChatGPT or Claude, and the amount of people that I speak to that would upload information which has severe data kind of privacy or customer data into the cloud. They would do that without a second thought because it helps them build a presentation, or it helps them kind of be more effective. That stuff is happening every day in our organizations. How do you guard against that? Because these big frontier models are not actively putting in place guardrails to prevent people from doing that. We get asked this all the time. It's like, how do you prevent someone from uploading, an HR person uploading a bunch of salary data, or a customer success manager uploading a bunch of financial data to the cloud that then is going to be kind of used as training materials? How do you guard against that? Because that feels like a complete kind of open-ended kind of pit of absolute pain down the road.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I think maybe a lot of organisations, they haven't got complete control or transparency or a process around this, but it's not any different to 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and so it's actually quite simple. It's really just locking down again, having those policies and business rules through your environment to ensure that you know what you want to allow, what cloud services or applications you want to allow, and what actions are permissible. So this is no different to, when you have a mobile device or you're working in a browser. It's enforcing those policies to ensure that you're limiting basically what people can upload or what they can do when they're in your corporate environment. And so we need to carefully lock that down where it makes sense. And so in some organizations, it's not allowed. We're not allowed to use ChatGPT, obviously. It's not approved. In some organizations, it is available. That's why I think a lot of organizations have introduced Copilot as their sort of starting safe option, because they have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, and they want to trial it and see how it goes. It's running inside the environment, and so things aren't essentially getting out into the public domain. But yeah, that's how you would review and make sure again that you're locking things down. So those channels of attack, what I was talking about earlier around working out where can data or things get out of the environment, and then sort of having a strategy or prevention, detection, whatever it is that you want to do based on the risk, enforcing policies around that. So then people cannot actually paste stuff into Teams and get it out, copy it out, or put a document and take a document out. It's the same thing in a browser, same thing in an application. You can lock it down. But other things also need to be complementary through this process. It can't be just technology. It's got to be awareness again. Policies, we have policies, acceptable use policies for AI or electronic use, all these different things, code of conduct. It's a people, process, technology again equation, problem solving, and then also training, obviously awareness, whether it's messages on your intranet or whether it's awareness training modules that people have to complete on a periodic or regular basis. And then you may have stand-ups, you may have emails that get sent out, and you may want to use an incident that has happened as a warning. Never waste a good incident, I say. But lots of different techniques, and it's got to be an ongoing, continuous, concerted effort. But one thing I will highlight, and this is how I've probably managed my programs with my team, in my roles, is you always need to anchor yourself in data and facts. So whenever you have a risk, like what you're saying around exfiltration or data loss or something like that, you need to be able to periodically monitor, gather, run reports, have a look at the behaviour, and this is something that I've been doing in my roles frequently. When you say how do you make decisions, how do you shape the cyber program, that's what you have to do. You have to, whether it's monthly, whether it's quarterly, this is really important to be able to run reports to see what is happening with user behaviour. What SaaS solutions or cloud solutions are people using? What are they doing? Not to identify them, but essentially to see whether they're risky. We've got lots of tools that tell us, the risk level of those things, making sure that we put those controls in place to prevent them, almost, error-proof them as much as possible, because we're trying to help people from not making mistakes as well, even though we want them to work. So if they're trying to go to a certain service or application on their browser, we know we'll block it perhaps and put a coaching message to say it's blocked for the organisation, and if they want to ask about it, then they should raise a request or some form of communication they can make. Or we may have more cautious messaging around you're navigating towards something that may be risky. Do you still want to do this? And that you give them an option of yes, you can navigate through, or you exit, you close the session. So all those data and facts help. What I used to do and still do currently is every quarter for board reporting and audit and risk reporting is really doing that sort of compliance and KPI audits around what is happening, so then you can actually make some decisions around are the behaviours and the target performance as expected, and do we need to make any adjustments to it.
That's interesting. I feel like I can clip myself with this one, but the idea of kind of performance managing somebody on their use of AI is new, because we've heard lots of companies talking about token maxing and how they want their engineers to be able to do and use AI as much as possible. But actually what you're talking about is how do you kind of performance manage somebody on the negative impact of using AI. So I mean that's an interesting concept. I guess just as a final question, imagine we are 26th of June 2027 and we look back and we go, okay, what is the biggest thing that went wrong for enterprise AI adoption? What do you think we're going to say when we're having that conversation in a year's time? Like, what should we have done differently with hindsight?
I think from my experience, I would say that I think we didn't do our assessment, for example, a formal assessment of it, and then design a bit of a supported, funded, program to be able to understand what the risks are and what, for example, initiatives we should be funding and driving forward, whether it's just internal effort, and it may not be external effort, and then just having a forum or a committee to be able to help make decisions and move things along. I think that's probably going to be the key. What I find when I speak to other leaders is they have this question about how do we fund, or how do we get an AI, sort of responsible AI or ethical AI, whatever you want to call it, AI project. And I think I've shied away from that because it hasn't worked. I don't think it works in my opinion, but obviously some organizations may fund it. That's great. Then fantastic, we can celebrate. But the ones that aren't getting the traction and they don't have funding for it, my advice always is to anchor the AI, be a bit of an opportunist and anchor the AI sort of development and analysis and evolution or adoption journey into an existing project, like a digital project or a data project, whatever it is. So an existing project, and running it through that is going to help because you don't need extra funding, but it's part of a use case or something related to that. And then you do really need to have various stakeholders from different areas, like whether it's people and culture, whether it's legal, whether it's IT, to be able to make decisions, gather data, analyze it periodically, and make decisions. In isolation, just doing this as a technology project is not going to work that well, in my experience anyway, because it's not a technology problem. It's an enterprise and a community thing. So you need to be able to involve relevant leaders to be part of that discussion and to get the support as well, because AI, we need to consider it not just for usage. So for Gen AI use, what we're generally doing in a corporate environment, people are using it and uploading things, and how can they use it more effectively. AI literacy, I've been a big advocate for that, working, partnering with people and culture and other executives to make sure that the future of our workforce is AI literate, essentially know how to use it and leverage it effectively. But there's other parts of it, it's purchasing AI, or again, onboarding AI, turning it on in existing products or solutions, or partnering with AI organizations. It could be developing AI internally or through a partnership. There are probably other aspects as well that other people, organizations are considering, and you just need a bit of a strategy and building in, again, some sort of a structure where you can channel and work through consistently and in a uniform way to solve those problems that are coming through. You can't really solve those things if you don't drive, there's not a central sort of function or structure to be able to enable those things. Again, creating that pathway for people to leverage or design new use cases, create efficiencies, introduce them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a bit of a hiding to nothing, that question, because how do you know it's moving so fast that what good looks like today is probably not what good looks like tomorrow or the week after or the month after.
Well, there is one thing for sure: you have to be able to make decisions, and I think that's maybe I would say just use that as a point to go, how are we going to make decisions, and work backwards. So that's what I always say about resilience as well. You know, think about a problem or things that can go wrong. What's important to you? What do you think will happen if something's gone or is not working? And then work backwards to think about how you can address that. And this is no different. So I think some leaders or people are waiting for somebody to come and save them and give them the answer.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to happen. We have to be the driver and the leader of things as much as possible, to be able to drive that conversation and enable adoption safely.
Well, good advice, I think, for everybody who probably do not audit their AI before they invest in it. But thank you so much for your time today, Sara. This has been a really interesting conversation. And although we haven't had a CISO one just yet, I'm looking forward to getting many more on, because I think it brings a very unique insight and perhaps a more level-headed approach to AI in a world where everyone's talking about it as if it's going to change everything. But actually, a lot of what you've talked about today is leveraging existing patterns, existing ways of working to kind of manage it in a kind of a safe way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
And appreciate
Pleasure.
your time today.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye.